right, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a Q&A episode and I have 3 questions I want to dive into. But first, before I go into that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp and nutrition periodization. If you want to learn more about how to do body recomp training, what goes into it. The link to that is in the show notes, as well as nutrition periodization, where I go over different phases, building phases, fat loss phases, maintenance phases, how to make adjustments, what to do, common mistakes in those. Again, the link to that is in the show notes. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Jeff, HOEHN _, and that's where I'm most active on social media. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first question is, how do you know if you're building muscle? I've been in a building phase for 3 months now. How do I know if I'm making results, right? This particular person asked this, but also this is just a very common question that I get with that. I think with fat loss, it's pretty apparent whether you're making, progress or not. You can see the visible change from week to week. Your scale weight's going down. Like you can tell there with that. But with muscle gain, there's really no sure way to know. And it just takes time. So it can be really challenging to know if you're making progress and disheartening as well too with that. However, the good news is there are some things that you can pay attention to make sure you're on the right path. But what I will say up front is that there is a lot of trusting the process you have to do when it comes to building muscle. It really teaches you to focus on the inputs versus the results because it is very slow. But there is some trusting the process that needs to go into building muscle. So let's dive into it. So first, like I said, building muscle is a slow process and it takes time. It's not like you can gain 5 pounds of muscle in a week. That's just not doable, right? As you get further and further into your training career, the more muscle you build, 5 pounds of muscle is a lot. So it's slow. So you're just not able to really measure those changes from like week to week, like you are in fat loss, where it's like, hey, my scale's going down, I'm getting leaner, like my clothes are fitting better, etc. And then to top it off, there really is no great way to tell if you're building muscle. So what I mean by that is, again, with fat loss, it's like we can see the visual changes. With building muscle, there are visual changes, but because it's so slow, it's harder to tell. And it's not like you can go in and again, get a DEXA and it's going to tell you the exact percentage of muscle that is being built, unfortunately. So a lot of these body comp readers, they're not going to be great for the building lean mass side of things. There's just too much air that goes into it. So it's, again, because it's so slow, there's not a lot of muscle that gets built at one time. And so it's not going to be able to detect those small changes. Really, it's a lot of just noise that goes into it. So you're not really going to be able to see the actual change there with that. Those are the first 2 things there with that. What this means is, like I said, there needs to be a little bit more of the trusting of the process, doing things like progressive overload, making sure that you're getting stronger over time, you're adding weight, right? That's one thing that we can do to make sure that, hey, I'm likely building muscle here. Eat enough protein. Again, you don't need to eat like 3 grams per pound of body weight, as I often see people think they need to do. You just need to make sure you eat enough there with that. And again, if you're in the fitness community, you've been into fitness for a while, you likely eat enough protein to build muscle there with that. It's not like if you're already eating 1 gram per pound of body weight, you go to 1.5 or 2, you're going to see this increase in muscle growth. That's the one secret. Again, that's not the case. You're probably good there. Again, you're sleeping well, you're managing your recovery overall. Again, like we want to make sure that's in a good spot. Don't undereat regularly. So as long as you're not like completely missing out on your calories, going like low calorie because you either skipped your meals or you feel like you need to lean out a little bit, again, you should be in a good spot to build muscle. But again, we also don't want to see weight come up too quickly. So it's finding that happy medium there. And as over time, continuing to work on improving your quality of training. So like your technique and execution and everything like that. If these are off, you need to work on these before worrying about how much muscle you are building or not. So again, get those things dialed in first before like really stressing about, oh, hey, I need to go take this scan to see if I'm building muscle. Because again, if you're under eating regularly, you're not using progressive overload, you don't need to worry about how much muscle you're building. You need to worry about fixing those things first. From there, once you get those dialed in, there's some things that you can pay attention to make sure you're on a good spot or in a good spot, right? Because I feel like a lot of times when people worry about not building muscle or not making progress that they want, it's because their inputs are not there, right? They're not doing the things that they should. So it's like that causes them to stress about seeing exact numbers and whatnot. So again, make sure you're doing the things that you need to do consistently, not just for a week, not for 2 weeks, for months on end there with that. All right, so let's talk about what are some things we can do to know if we're building muscle or not, or what are some good indicators? Because again, it is going to be somewhat subjective. And again, this is where having a coach for this can be super helpful. But let's talk about this. So first, it's your training performance. Are you getting stronger in, say, the 6 to 15 rep range over time? If so, chances are you are building your muscle. A lot of times people will test their 1 rep max strength and be like, oh, hey, I'm this is going up, so therefore I'm building muscle. And that's not always going to be the case, right? We want to make sure we're like getting stronger in that like 6 to 15-ish rep range there with that. So for example, a year ago for dumbbell bench press, you could do 55 by 888. Now you can do it for 70 by 888. So this is a great sign you have built muscle in your chest. Again, if it was like, oh, hey, last year I could do my 1 rep max for 55, now I can do it for 70. You probably built a little bit of muscle, but we don't know for sure. We need to be specific to that kind of hypertrophy muscle growth rep range there to make sure that you really solidified those gains. Plus, it's probably important that you do this more on isolation type exercises versus more compounds. Now, I know dumbbell bench is somewhat compound, but it uses mostly the chest there on it. So it's a pretty solid carryover. But if we were looking at our deadlift, or a conventional deadlift or like a back squat, again, it can be a good sign, but if that's not going to be as good of an indicator that you're building muscle, right? So again, we'd want to take things like, think like your leg extensions, your bicep curls, your lateral raises, your hamstring curls, like things like that. If you're getting stronger in those like 6 to 15 rep range on those, that's a really good sign you built muscle in those specific muscle groups, right? Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily build muscle in like your arms. If you're doing your curl, like your hamstring curls, might not mean your biceps necessarily have grown, but at least in your hamstrings, you can be pretty safe that you have built muscle in the process. And again, this is also saying that, hey, you're overloading, you're sleeping, your protein's in a good spot, all those things as well too that I mentioned initially. One caveat though, this is technique dependent. So meaning if you've improved technique, that could be a form of progressive overload despite the absolute numbers not going up. So there's 2 ways to look at this. One, if your technique is off because you're just trying to get more weight, okay, yeah, you're stronger in the 615 rep range, but are you actually placing tension on the target muscle? And then to take that further, maybe your numbers haven't gone up as much as you want, but your technique's better. That's a good sign that you have built muscle, even though those weight numbers haven't necessarily gone up there with that. So it is very technique dependent. So this is where form videos can be super helpful here. And this is what I typically do with clients: get form videos, make sure they're getting stronger and that they're doing it with proper technique as well too. Okay, so number 2 are progress pics. Make sure to look at progress pics over time as well too. So again, if your progress pics are improving, you're noticing muscle growth in certain areas, that's a really good sign. But here's the thing: you don't want to compare your January 1st picture to your January 15th picture, right? It's too close together. You're not going to see that much change if your main goal is to build muscle. Instead, you want to compare January 1st to July 1st. You want to compare January 1st of 2023 to January of 2024. Again, we want to zoom out and get a longer time frame on this, because that's where you're really going to see those change, and be patient here. Again, if you look at these pictures, like you'll be able to tell in your arms or whatever areas you've been working on if you have built muscle. Now, the only kind of caveat here to this is if you are seeing your body weight go up a little bit, maybe a little quicker than like the 1% of body weight per month, you might be having some fat that is masking some of that progress. So just keep that in mind there with that. Also, with my client, like one of my clients, he's in a building phase now, and he always, hey, am I building muscle? And I always ask him like, hey, do you feel it? And let's look at your progress pictures. And you can tell in his progress pictures, yeah, he's got a little bit more body fat. Maybe he's not as lean as he was initially, but you can tell in his arms, like they're way bigger. His delts are bigger. His back's bigger. Okay, yeah, again, we don't have any for sure thing that's saying you're building muscle, but like looking at your progress pictures, I can visually tell. So again, don't underestimate that. But again, we're also going to cross-reference that to him getting stronger on lists as well too. So number 3 are clothes. If your clothes are tighter in certain areas, like your thighs, chest, and arms, but they're looser or just as loose in your midsection, this is a good sign you're building muscle. So again, if like your delts are filling out, your biceps are filling out your triceps, but then like in the midsection, yeah, it's getting a little bit tighter, but it's not as tight as everything else is getting, that's a really good sign, right, that you're building muscle. Now, if you were gaining weight and it was getting really tight in the midsection, but nothing else was really going up, then I would be like, hey, can we improve any of these things that we talked about initially, right? The protein, the overloading, sleeping well. Are you eating too much? You need to dial that back. Do we need to go at a slower rate of gain? Things like that. But again, if your clothes are fitting better, that's a really good sign there. Measurements. Regularly measure the circumference of different body parts. Increases in size, especially in target areas like biceps, thighs, or chest, can indicate muscle growth. So this is where, again, now we can, okay, hey, I'm getting stronger. I'm looking better. My progress pictures, I'm getting bigger in those areas I want to. My clothes are fitting better. They're not getting super tight in the midsection. Now we also look at measurements. Hey, your biceps are going up, your thighs are going up, but your midsection is going up at a much slower rate. Again, a great sign that you're building muscle on there with that. So now it's like we have 4 things that we can look at, and it's okay, all those things are heading in the right direction, and you're doing all the things we talked about. You're building muscle, even though, again, we don't have anything that can specifically tell us that. So body composition tests can you can do this. However, things like DEXA, bod pods, and the bioelectrical impedance, they can be used for tracking muscle growth, but I don't recommend them, and they aren't likely to be able to track small increases in muscle growth like I talked about. They're also very sensitive to things like hydration, meals, and other factors which can skew results, and like training too. So if you go and train and then you take it, like it might show that your lean body mass is lower. If you're dehydrated, you're not as hydrated as you typically are. That's going to maybe tell you that your lean body mass is lower. Same thing with like glycogen. If you, and this kind of goes back to intense exercise, if you do intense exercise, you deplete your glycogen storage. That's going to show up as lean body mass loss. So then somebody sees that and they're like, oh crap, I'm losing muscle. But it's, look, if all these other things are in place, you're in a good spot. It just shows you that kind of one like snapshot in time right there. So again, just use them as one piece of the puzzle and focus on consistent testing conditions to accurately monitor progress. And that's consistent testing conditions with the body comp test, and combine them with strength gains and visual changes for the full picture. But again, I don't recommend them. I don't have clients take these because of that. For those reasons there, it just gets in people's head more than anything. While you're out of a fat loss diet, you may have a little bit of extra body fat that could be masking some of your gains. Keep this in mind. You might not be as lean as you were during your fat loss phase. So you might not be able to see all the progress, but don't fully judge the success of your muscle gaining phase until you run another cut where you really start to notice that progress there with that. So yeah, don't fully judge the success of your muscle gaining phase until you run another cut. This is where you'll really be able to see all the progress you've made there with that. It's important to take that step back. Like just because you're in the middle of a building phase and it's, hey, maybe I feel like I'm gaining a ton of body fat. Again, look at your methods, see if you can improve any of those. Look at these other indicators, which are a good sign. And then again, don't fully judge this building phase until after the fact. So again, if you didn't build as much muscle as you wanted, then you have two options: improve your input for the next gaining phase. Again, you can try and change that as soon as possible to really make sure those are dialed in first, or then two, accept that building muscle might be a bit tougher for you and you can keep going or don't, right? You also have that option as well too, because some people, no matter what, they're just going to be genetically, it's just going to be a little bit slower to build muscle. So you have the option there to, again, see if you can improve your inputs, or again, because it's just going to be something that's going to be a little bit tougher for you, and you have to be okay with that with that. So hopefully that was helpful. Now we'll dive into the next questions. All right, let's go into the next question. So does a higher step count make you more hungry? And it certainly can. This is how I go about steps. This is my thought process. You can use this or not, but this is how I help figure it out. So if we get under, say, like 7,000 to 8,000 steps per day, this is going to equal a poor appetite regulation and less energy expenditure. Basically, what's going to happen there is poor appetite regulation. So what's going to happen is, one, you are going to feel more hungry because you're not moving enough, right? So whether that be from bored eating or just the fact that, hey, now your system's, hey, we don't really know like how much to eat, when to stop, how much energy we need. Either way, it's going to lead to poor appetite regulation. So you might find that you're more hungry because you're not active. And again, is that bored eating or what's going on there? And because of that, you're also just going to have less energy expenditure in general because you're not moving as much, right? So it's that double whammy there with that. But yes, low step counts can certainly lead to more hunger. Then we have like anywhere from, say, 7 to 12K. This is where you're going to have an improved appetite regulation. And so there with that, your body's going to be much better at being like, okay, hey, this is too much energy. This is not enough. We need a little bit more. But either way, it's going to match. Your body's going to do a much better job of regulating its appetite based on your movement when you get to the 7 to 12K. And you're obviously going to reap the benefits of the increased energy expenditure. You're going to be able to, because you're expending a little bit more energy, you might be able to eat a little bit more food and maintain your weight there with that. And this is usually the sweet spot for most from a time standpoint, what you can commit to, and again, for all those other reasons. And then third, we have 12K plus increased, and this is going to obviously have an increased energy expenditure. You get more than 12,000 steps per day, you're going to be expending a pretty good amount of energy, which can be great from like a fat loss perspective. And again, you can maintain your weight on even higher calorie and caloric intake. But here at this point, now you may start to see your hunger increase because of the increased energy expenditure, because now you're increasing so much energy now, your body's going to sense that and it's going to be more hungry. And it's going to want to make up for that energy deficit by you eating more food there with that. And then on top of this, not only that, but then getting more than 12,000 steps per day, that's from a time component, that's really challenging to do. So it's not as practical and feasible for you or for most people as well too there with that. But again, that's another kind of reason why we're getting more than 12,000 can be an issue. There's many people I know that they think that they need to just move as much as they can because they don't want to lose weight. And obviously with that, it's okay. If it fits your lifestyle and that's what you do from day to day, and it doesn't require you to go out of your way to get it done, it's okay. Hey, that's your lifestyle. We'll just need to obviously adjust. There probably is some sort of regulation to that where your body just naturally just gets used to that. But if you're somebody that you really have to go out of your way, it's a pain to get all these steps in, you might actually be shooting yourself in the foot here, and you might be better off in this 8 to 12K range there with that. Again, but this 12 plus K, it's a rough guideline. For some people, this may be 15, this may be 16,000. But like, again, the point it being of this is that when you have a little amount of step, you're probably going to see an increase in hunger and you're not going to have as much energy expenditure. So because of that, you're likely to be in this state where energy in is going to exceed energy out because of those two things. And then we have that 7-ish to 12-ish K mark. And again, our body's going to be naturally matched up to the appetite is going to be matched up. You're going to expend a little bit more energy. And from a practical standpoint, it's probably more feasible to get that. So that's that sweet spot. And then you go past that, and that's where hunger probably starts to ramp up again when you have really high levels of movement throughout the day. So again, it really comes down to what can you commit to and what do you enjoy? And this is why I go to that 8 to 12K mark. So it's like a J-shaped curve, right? Where low, higher hunger, middle, perfect, too high, probably higher hunger as well too, but it does come with some higher energy expenditure. I think if anything, we should always try to move. It's obviously going to be great for our overall health as well too there. Just a different way to look at steps. Okay, so my last question of the day is, can you say something about abs, how to train them, how much? So I think the myth, I was going to say misconception of training abs is that you need to train them in like a different way than you would train any other muscle group. And I think this really stems from, if I just do a ton of work in my abs, I'll lose some belly fat. And again, we know it's not the case, right? Like in order to really drop body fat, like you need to be in a energy deficit for sustained periods of time. And that's what's going to help you lose that body fat. Now, if you train your abs and you want to build them up, okay, that's a different story. And I think with that, what you can do, what building your abs does by training them is you probably can see your abs at a little bit of a higher body fat percentage. But again, if you're 25% body fat as men and over 30% as women, you're not going to be able to see your abs. You're going to have to lose body fat there. But as you get down to these lower body fat levels, you might be able to see your abs pop out a little bit sooner if you train them. So that would be the benefit of it. It's not going to help you lose body fat. That's going to be through your energy expenditure and energy in, but they can maybe help you see them a little bit earlier in the process. In saying this though, abs don't really need to be trained directly if you don't want to build up those muscles. So if you don't want to build up those areas or that area, I think that's a muscle group that you really don't have to train if you don't have time for. This kind of falls under my, if a client wants to train it and they have time for it, then we train abs. But if both of those things are off, we don't train it. But if you do want to build them up, then you obviously need to train them. And then from there, it's okay, how do we go about training them? Again, because it's another muscle group, we don't want to train it we wouldn't train it any different than any other muscle group. So what this means is we probably want to train them anywhere between 5 and 30 reps, right? We know that's the rep range that really maximizes muscle growth. And if we want to get even more pinpoint with it, I would say anywhere from like 6 to 15 reps, maybe 8 to 15 reps, specifically with the abs there with that. That's going to be that sweet spot. So long as, again, you're training it relatively close to failure in these sets. Again, we don't have to go to failure, but you probably want to get to 1, 2, 3 reps in reserve for this if you really want to build muscle. Again, you progressively overload them just like every other muscle group there with that. So that's how I would go about it. Now, what about like specific exercises and whatnot there? So I typically program 3 to 6 sets per week. Not much more, right? Again, people think they need to do a ton of abs, but I think 3 to 6 sets is more than enough. Again, if you really want to build your abs, maybe you could go up to 9 to 12, but I really don't see from a time standpoint it being beneficial to do anymore. You're better off like focusing on other muscle groups at that point. So again, 3 to 6 sets per week. You can do it all in one session. You can split it up just because of the low volume. It's like you could do it in one session. You could split it up, just see where it fits best. Again, if you do it all in one session and you do 6 sets, it's 2 exercises you need to dedicate to that. Could that time be spent elsewhere for those sessions, right? I'm not overly concerned about that. I personally, if I'm programming 2 exercises for abs, it's going to be something like a decline sit up and then a kneeling cable crunch. So something where you're crunching down and then something where you are flexing up as well too, like in the decline sit up. That's typically how I would train the abs. I don't talk about it much just because it's low on the priority list, especially from a body recomp, body composition focus standpoint. But some people do want to train their abs. But what I will say on this is if you're doing these high, like 500 sit-ups a day type thing, it's like, I feel like your time could be spent elsewhere and whatnot. So that's how I would train abs. Hopefully that makes sense. And that is it for this Q&A. Let me know if you guys have any questions. And if you do have questions like these in terms of, hey, how to train abs, how to train your back, how much volume to do, what should your macros be, what phase should I be in? Hey, am I building muscle? If these are all common questions you have, then I think we need to set up a free 30-minute strategy call where we can talk about your struggles, where you want to go, and how we can get you on the right path to that. And so if you're interested in setting that up, the link is in the show notes. And yeah, I'm also just a DM away as well too. So if you ever have any questions as well, just reach out to me on Instagram and I'm more than happy to answer your question there on that. So that's it for this episode and I will chat with you next time.